From Chicago, welcome to 3Degrees Discussions. I'm your host, Mike Vasquez. This is a podcast devoted to the stories behind the innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders in the 3D printing industry.
My mindset is such that, not much scares me. And the reason that's good for a career is a lot of times what stifles people in innovation is confidence. The biggest difference is just being confident to try something, to do something different.
That was Scott Volk. Besides being the first professional paintball player and bull rider we've had on the podcast, Scott is the Vice President of Business Development and Strategy at Keselowski Advanced Manufacturing. Scott's career has spanned over 30 years in the AM industry, including stops at Encodima 3D, GPI, and laser molding. In addition to his day job at CAM, Scott has also started his own 3D printing polymer business called Advanced Additive Innovations. Before we get started, head over to www.3degreescompany.com and subscribe to the podcast. And you can listen to the show anywhere you download your podcast, including Spotify, Apple, Amazon, or Stitcher. All right, Scott, thank you so much for joining the show today. I'm excited for the conversation. You've got a great history in the additive space and excited to hear your story and all the things you've learned along your career. And so like we do with all the guests, I like to kind of place some context with folks in terms of kind of the person, not just the additive guru. and so where'd you grow up? Kind of what were your early days like, and what were you doing in terms of anything that kind of got you on the path of the manufacturing space?
Yeah. I grew up in Arizona. So my dad was a heavy equipment operator. So we moved around a lot. He was constantly working himself out of a job. And so, when a road's done or a building's done, whatever it was, it's move on to the next city. So I moved a lot. I mean, to put that in perspective, one year in high school, I had 7 different English teachers. So it was kind of rough sometimes, with education and moving from school to school, so we moved all over Arizona. I grew up there and went to high school in Peoria. And, I always had a love for technology. So even in high school, there's a few things to note. I took computer programming. It was when it first started, it was like the Apple IIe, when we were programming in BASIC. And so that got me started in computers and understanding it. I got a Commodore 64 at home and a TRS-80, or as we all love to call it, a Trash 80. Had one of those at home as well, and made my own games and things like that. And that's back when there was no real graphics. It was all kind of like Zork, like Word, choose your own adventure kind of games. And so that's what got me involved in technology. And then as I started to grow up and venture out to do work, I was always drawn to like construction and things like that. Some fun things I did that just kind of show my adventurousness. is for a short stint I played professional paintball. I was involved in a karate circuit, so I did a lot of full contact karate. And then the best thing I did that everybody loves is I was a bull rider for several years. So that was fun. And it takes a kind of crazy mentality to be able to jump on a 2-ton animal that wants to kill you and go for it. But I'm kind of that guy, and everybody who knows me knows that. And as part of that and the circuits of, paintball, it took me up to Washington and Oregon. That's when I got involved in fiberglass lamination. And that's, what really got me going as far as creativeness and the aerospace world. And, I really was drawn to, we made helicopter cockpits and like wing fairings and things like that out of composites and plastics. And then when I moved back to California, I say back, I didn't explain moving there, but my dad moved around, got a job in California. So I ended up in California, finished up high school there. But then when I left and went to Oregon and Washington, I came back to California, and there was a company that was kind of just got started. It was maybe like 2 years in. It was one of the first companies in 3D printing, and it was Sycon Technologies in Southern California, there in Valencia. And so, I signed on, applied as to sand on SLA parts and just work on the bench and get involved in this. And I figured, well, hey, with the fiberglass work I've done, fits right in there. I can do sanding and trimming. Why not? So, got involved with Sycon and, started with sanding parts and seeing things like that. But I was just fell in love with all the 3D printing and how that worked, and all the SLA machines that they had. And we were doing this. They were working on this thing over in the corner. It was RTD molding and castings. And so I learn really fast, and I love to innovate. So I wanted to get more involved in other things in the company. So I figured out a way to manage the crew really well, so that it would give me extra time so that I could go poke around in the other areas of the company. And so I started looking over the shoulder of the guy that was running the RTD area, or kind of building it, trying to figure it out. And eventually it got to the point where he wanted to go into sales. I took over the RTD, and I eventually took over the entire shop, and made a lot of developments in the RTD area. That's what led me into the movie work that I ended up doing. I left in Sycon, started my own company for a while. And that's when I got into the movie work. So I did a whole lot of movies like, Triple X, Batman, Bicentennial Man, or Bicentennial, Cradle to the Grave, all those types of movies. Solaris was a pretty cool movie that I worked on. That one and Cradle to the Grave, I had a lot of involvement in those two movies. Solaris, I made if you watch the beginning of the movie and all through it, but the beginning of the movie is pretty cool because once you get past the drama buildup and they fly out in the shuttle, I built that whole shuttle. So like when you're in the cockpit of the shuttle, and I did some of the cool stuff like that Disney does. So, a lot of the guys that were working with me, I put their names in some of the buttons and switches and things like that. We didn't get lucky enough to get any close-ups or anything like that. So our names don't show up. There's not any of the mistakes like, hey, look at that. Like none of that happened, but I was hoping for it. So there's a few things in there, but yeah, we had to make 2 of those shuttle capsules in case something happened. And that was a fun job because I had to be on set in case something went wrong. So, George Clooney was in that movie, and, I got to hang out with them on the catering and sitting around the set. What's challenging about movie work, and a lot of people don't know this, is most of it happens at night. So, a lot of these people, they work super late hours. And the reason they do that is so they can control the lighting. There's, you can put up lights and then control all the lighting at night. Whereas in the day, you're kind of emboldened to whatever the sun gives you, right? So clouds and sun. And so anyway, so it was pretty fun to be out there with them and doing that stuff. I moved from there to Chicago. I guess one short note about the company and why it didn't really go very far. I named my company 911 Prototypes. Which was great at the time because of emergency, like, hey, dial 911, it was pretty cool. But then 9/11 happened, and and that kind of changed the perspective of like what 911 means, right? So that kind of killed some of my branding. But beyond that, my 2 best customers were in the building. And so once that happened and I lost those 2 customers, I just didn't want to go bankrupt. And I had my daughter. I was a single father. And I just figured, what, I'm going to go back to work for people instead of trying to fight through this. So I just let it go. I ended up going back to college to do CAD and CAM software schooling. And from there, I was in the middle of the courses and I got called up to come out to Chicago for a company now out of business, but a company called Laser Modeling Inc. And that's actually where, Jim Hockey, who I know really well, that's where him and I met. And then from there on, him and I have been involved in a lot of companies together. So that was really exciting as well. But, I had to pack up and move. And for a short while, I had to leave my daughter behind because I couldn't take her out of state based on, the divorce and how that all worked out. So that was hard. But I moved to Chicago and worked with that company, built them up as best I could. They were a bit split as far as their ideas of what they wanted to do. And a lot of times, if you're not focused in a business, you won't last. And they had ideas of, making resin and doing an aftermarket laser and things like that. And so it just, they got themselves spread too thin. So they kind of fell apart. But from there, Jim and I created GPI Prototype, and that company did very well. We built that up over several years. I was there around 7 years or so, and that company did really well. And what was really exciting about that company is that's when the introduction to metal happened. So up until then, we were doing a lot of SLA, SLS, FDM type parts, a lot of outsourcing. That's why a lot of people in the 3D business, with all the prototyping and rapid prototyping that we're involved in, we all know like injection molding and sheet metal and machining. We understand those businesses so well because really what we were is a bunch of outsourcers. We were all about like people would need a quick prototype, and plastic, 3D printing was great for pieces of it. But what would end up happening is you still need sheet metal, you still need electronics, you still need, vacuum forming or something, so we had to become experts in all the fields. So castings, brazings, welding, and, plating, things like that were all different things that we all had to learn. And that's actually what led us to what was next, which was Encodema 3D. So, I was actually out at a company interviewing. Jim and I were both kind of looking for a job at the same time. And Jim was at Encodema 3D. I was at Visser out in Colorado, and at the exact same time. And it was kind of funny because the owner of Visser was writing me an offer. He said, "Hey, I'll be back. I'm going to write you an offer." And I'm like, "Okay, great. I'll sit right here and wait." And in the meantime, I'm texting with Jim. Jim's over at Encodema. He's sitting with Sean Whitaker, and the same thing's going on over there. And he told him, "Look, I'm not going to take a job unless I know you're going to be there." And I'm like, "Well, hey, you need to come out and see this." And he goes, No, you need to come out and see this. And so I finally agreed, like, all right. I won't take the offer. I'll come out and see what you got going out there at Encodema. Let's see what happens. And sure enough, I showed up. And that's a funny story with my wife, but that one's long, so we'll leave that one out. But she was kicking and screaming the whole way. She didn't really want to move to New York. So, but we showed up, we got there. I toured the place, talked to Sean, and I told Jim, "You're right. This is it. Like, Visser's got some great things going on, but this is definitely going to go somewhere." So him and I signed on, and we took it over to build up Encodema 3D from there. Ela, who just retired from Encodema this last week, they got bought out by Fathom and went public, and it looks like, my guess is she was warranted, and that's ended, and so now she gets to go enjoy the money from the sales. So yeah, I mean, Ela started that with a business plan out of school. She was doing her MBA, and as part of her studies, she wrote the business plan for Encodema 3D. And then Jim and I came on to help bring that up, and it's been extremely successful. I mean, Encodema 3D is one of the leaders in the industry now that, really kind of led the way for metal 3D printing and CNC, and combining those two as a hybrid operation. I escalated through the company after that up to the point of being the CTO. And then, I just needed more adventure, more challenge. I like helping companies build up. Keselowski Advanced Manufacturing called me up and said, "Hey, would you be interested in helping us get to where, Encodema's gotten to?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm looking for some challenges now. And, I think that'd be exciting." So I signed on with the Keselowski Advanced Manufacturing. And I'll tell you, even though Encodema 3D does a great job, Cam and what Brad Keselowski has really put into that facility is just amazing. I mean, anybody who takes the time to come out and see it, and by the way, everybody's invited, just call me up and let me know you want to come out. But, that place is just, what has happened with the combination of additive and CNC is just amazing. It's amazing. But yeah, so then, what you see in the background here is kind of, my next steps. I'm still working at CAM full time. But, I've started this little side business of mine, and what you see back there is about half of my shop. I've got 12 machines now. And, and where this came from is just, I started in plastics, as we just talked about, and I've been in this now almost 30 years, and and I, for a long time, I've ignored the polymers world. And when I was in metals, I just kind of focused on metals because I figured, and it's come true. Metals is definitely the future. The commercial world is really grappling onto the metals world, and it's exciting, and it's definitely growing, and it's really where it's at. But there's a lot of cool stuff going on in the polymer side too. And I started looking at that, and I'm like, this is where I started. This is my true love, and and I love keeping myself busy. So I started buying machines, and now I've got 12 machines and 2 more on the way. And it's turned out to be a little fun thing I can do at night and on the weekends. And I'm super careful not to have it compete or get in the way of what I do at CAM, but it's fun. It's fun. So, and if anybody who knows me knows that I never shut off. I'm always working. Unfortunately for my wife, I don't have a whole lot of downtime in that way, because I'm always working. To me, work is fun. Engaging with people in the additive industry is super exciting and fun. And, this just keeps me busy all the time in that realm. So, as I'm super active on LinkedIn and driving things there. And, this gave me another way to talk about things there too. So, yeah, I just love 3D printing and additive manufacturing, and it's exciting.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate the overview. So I've got a lot of questions from that. So maybe one high. I mean, I'd be remiss if I don't go back to the bull riding and some of the martial arts stuff. But I mean, you've had a dynamic career. You've been in a lot of places, different locations, kind of dealing with personal stuff as well as kind of professional kind of changes in the industry. I mean, what about some of those early lessons that you were doing, moving around a lot, kind of do the martial arts, doing kind of bull riding? Like, have you been able to bring to your career? What context does it give? I mean, for me, I started jujitsu about a year ago, and it's one of those things where like it helps you give perspective, right? Like you have to be really focused when you have to be very present when you're practicing something like that. Otherwise you're going to get choked out or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
But,
right.
And it makes the rest of the day a little bit easier when you're going into a meeting. It's like, oh, like, okay, we can figure this out. Right. So what for you, kind of what are some of the things that you've brought to some of your outside of work pursuits that have helped you expand your career?
Yeah. As you said, it gives you a whole new perspective on, how you can approach things. One thing that, with the paintball and the martial arts, those two things, what's really important in those is, controlling your body, controlling your emotions, and understanding how to focus. And, so I learned a lot of that, through those. Bull riding brought on a whole nother aspect. Certainly, you've got to learn how to control your body, the same as martial arts. But, it's the fear factor. You really have to be able to stay cool during that time. And look, don't get me wrong. I mean, anybody who knows me knows I'm highly wired, and I'm not the coolest all the time, but certainly, my mindset is such that, not much scares me. And the reason that's good for a career is, a lot of times what stifles people in innovation is confidence. The biggest difference is just being confident to try something, to do something different. And I really attribute what I went through with bull riding and having to face that moment, right before they open the gate, not knowing what's about to happen, in the next 20 seconds. This could be the end of my life. This could be, who knows? This could change my whole life right here. But you're not going to know unless you pop open the gate, right? So that I was able to carry with me from that point on, to be able to, really just venture into anything. I've had a lot of times, because of all of what I've been through in this industry, even at CAM, I'm not really known for being a business development person. But usually what I am is I'm a technical advisor. I support sales teams. I do things like that. But I'm always willing to take on a new challenge, and so sales needed some help. So I jumped into sales, and I did really well there. And then, we really needed to push towards business development, and Brad trusted me with, hey, take this on. But I don't really have a whole lot of experience in business development. So I had to, that's where the bull riding comes in, is just, okay, no fear, let's do it. Let's take the challenge and drive into it. And, yeah, so that's what it really does for me, is it gives me a whole different perspective of being able to take on challenges.
And so when you were in that transition, kind of looking at right before you were going to Encodema, you had been at a few other companies, and you'd had probably in the back of your mind some way that you're evaluating kind of what's best for my career, what's best for me, what's going to keep me interested, is the company going to be around? So can you walk us through that decision-making process when you're looking at, even especially today when like there's so many new machines, new companies coming out, like if you're kind of looking at changing careers or things like that, like how do you think through new career opportunities that come across your desk? Like what's your metrics? Like how are you evaluating, like, hey, is this company going to be around in 3 years? Like, does it matter that it's around in 3 years? Will I get a cool experience? Like what is your kind of mindset when you go into some of those situations where you were transitioning in your career?
My answer at first is going to sound pretty egotistical, but I just have the confidence in myself. So a lot of times the opportunities that I end up with in are people who already know me. It's funny, there's been a couple opportunities where people say, hey, can you send me a resume? And for the longest time, I didn't have a resume. It's because everybody who hires me knew me from somewhere. They already saw how I work and how I perform. And they're just like, hey, we need that. Like, come on board, let's do this. And how I assess them, I've always been with startups. It's always about starting something new and working with people and taking this technology to the next level. And because of my really high confidence in myself, I look at it as, I'm not concerned about if the company's going to be there, because I'm the one who's going to make that company be there. And so as I approach that, I'm always looking at, how do I make this company strive? How do I make this grow? How do I make this become the number one? Jim and I did that at GPI. We took that and did that in Encodema 3D, and now I'm doing that here at CAM, right? So, it's just a mindset. It's, don't go into it thinking that, certainly you count on the team, and there's a team that's going on, but I don't know that team before I start, right? So all I can count on is me. And I know that I'm going to do all the things that it takes, and I'm going to push and shove to make this happen. And because I know I can do that, I never have a question of whether a company's going to be there or not. Every opportunity is going to be a good opportunity because I have that mentality to make it happen.
Kind of being aggressive and making things happen with the customers, but like whether you're changing roles from business development to sales or vice versa or whatever it may be, kind of solving the problems that need to be solved. So
yeah, exactly.
And kind of with that, maybe share some perspective on how customers have changed over the last 30 years. Like, you've been in the additive space for a while now. You've seen improvements in the technology. You've seen companies come and go. You've seen kind of production go into place in many different organizations and industries. Like, what are your kind of general observations over that time?
Yeah. Oh man, that's been a huge change over the years. Way back, geez, 25, 28, somewhere in there years ago, customers had no clue what was going on in 3D printing, right? Like, some of the funny stories I have around that are, when we used to make SLA parts, they were so brittle and fragile that I literally would hand deliver parts. And I would show up, and of course they reach out to grab the part, and I'd be like, hang on. Where do you want this to sit? And they're like, what do you mean? Just let me have it. I'm like, no, you can't grab this. Like, I'm going to set it where it belongs. You're not going to touch it. Leave it alone, because you even look at it wrong, it'll break, right? And to answer your question, customers just didn't know. They didn't know what to expect. They didn't know how it works. Heck, we didn't even know how it works, right? And it was changing and growing rapidly. And so, the biggest change that's happened over the years with customers is the knowledge change. So back then they didn't really have an idea. So it was a really hard sale. But it became easy because there was just this magic that could happen. For the tooling world, injection molding was the biggest area for that, right? Like, it was so expensive to go through the process of injection molding back then, because design iteration meant you had to make all new tools, right? And that's really what made 3D printing so successful, was the ability to visualize, hold in your hand the part that you're going to make without tooling, right? So you don't have to go through injection molding and do all that tooling. You can make the part, feel it, see it. And what we found was, as a world, and you can see a lot of the change in technology that's happened, not just with 3D printing, but cell phones and all kinds of things that have developed. It's all around people being able to visualize things. I mean, if you think about it, humans want to be able to see and feel what they're thinking about. So you look at like VR technology and things like that. That's all, I mean, all these things about being able to program in space and grab it and pull it and move it, that's all people wanting to be able to visualize. And 3D printing made that a possibility, right? Like, you could take your CAD and be able to print it in a few days, visualize it, feel it, hold it. And so knowledge base is what changed. I mean, go 10 years forward from that, it started to be customers knew how to specify what they wanted. Back then we were teaching and training and pulling them along. And then they got to the point where they knew what FDM was. They knew what SLS was. They knew what SLA was. So they were able to start helping us specify. But where the gaps were is they didn't understand the materials, right? So you were constantly running into this problem of like, oh yeah, just anything plastic. Then it wasn't hard enough, and it wasn't high heat enough. And, they would put it in their trunk expecting it to be like an injection molded part. And it was, warped like crazy and flat. And now it doesn't work. Horror stories like you wouldn't believe that I've been through. 15 years, here comes metal. Metal starts to come out, and, now you have companies that know what they're doing, right? Now you have the Honeywells, the Boeings, the Lockheed, those types of companies that have the engineering staff and the science, the material science behind it, that they started to play a real active part. I mean, in direct metal, EOS, brought that on board as a way to prototype metal parts. As I was talking about, that to be able to visualize, well, that want to be able to visualize better and more was, well, yeah, that's great. I can make a plastic part of my eventual metal part, but that doesn't really help me do anything. And so making parts out of metal was what EOS made possible, right? So now you have the metal parts, and, but that was all just prototyping. They really didn't envision that this was going to become production viable. In fact, there were companies, on the level of Honeywell that got on stage and said, we're never going to make rotating parts. It's never going to happen. We're never going to use 3D printing for, any of these mission critical applications. But look today, SpaceX is building their rockets out of, metal additive. Relativity Space is printing an entire rocket. I mean, so all the mission critical applications, that's all been debunked, right? Like, I mean, we understand that, yeah, we can use this. And it wasn't but 10 years ago that people were saying that. So the knowledge base, like I said, that's what's changed, and those companies have been involved. And now it's to the point where we're really digging deep. Now it's in situ monitoring and the software that we're using to better ourselves. And customers are all part of that. Customers are writing the specifications today, of what powder to use, what machines to use. So they're really actively involved. And I think, next step, there's a lot of people in this industry who that bothers, right? It's hard to do work. Like, if you look at CNC machining, the customers aren't that actively involved in like what machine you're going to use or how you're going to go about your paths. They don't do that. Well, that's because the confidence level in that technology has gotten to the point where they don't need to be anymore. But additive isn't there yet, right? We all want to hurry and make that the case, but the reality is it's just time. It's the customers need to, that knowledge transfer that has been happening for the last 30 years is that progression that we need. And I think we're probably within 10 years from being able to start being machine agnostic and, the customers not being so actively involved. It gets to the point, there's many customers that are now designing and putting it on a print to say, printed Inconel 718, heat treated this way, go, and they're hands off from that point on. And so, that's starting. And I think we're, 5 to 10 years away from, it'll be just like CNC. Like, here's my print, make my part. We're not going to be all up in your business, just make things. But yeah, it's definitely the knowledge base of the customer base that's changed over the years, and their appreciation and understanding of the process and the technology.
And you also mentioned when you were talking about CAM, the dual, like the incorporation of machining as well, and all the post-processing steps, and how you can really use additive and machining to make some really interesting parts and capabilities that you're starting to merge things together, and you're starting to really take advantage of the opportunities that both technologies allow for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, what Cam's got going on is super special. And you really got to see it to understand and believe it, right? But what's happened in our industry, and Cam has really grabbed this by the horns and just really doing it, is one of the things that's happening in the industry with the software. Now, the software is really helping us, and it's changing things for the better. But without the full understanding of how this whole process is going to happen, one of the things that's starting to happen is topology optimization, generative design, ergonomic shapes within parts is kind of going too far. And what I mean by that is the additive world is striving so hard to make the perfect printable part. But the problem with that is when you do that and you really make it a perfect printable part, it's almost not machinable, because there's no way to hold it. There's no way to fixture it. There's no way to approach it. The way you have to change your orientation to be able to approach certain sides. You almost make it impossible to do that. And then beyond that, how are you going to inspect it? So now you're using, scanning with these huge cloud data problems, right? And, so I think to some degree, like I said, I think we've gone too far for what the technologies can handle today, right? Like, I mean, certainly that is the future, and that's where we're going to be. But just like every other technology, you got to have to pause a little bit to let everything catch up so that you can then move forward. So what Cam's doing, yeah, is definitely taking a step back a little bit, looking at, okay, this is great, but how are we going to hold it? So you add stock to certain areas, and you really plan from, a big challenge for additive industry right now is making, and it's starting to be talked about, right? It's not just about, Paul from NASA has said, don't just print something for the sake of printing it, because it's not cost effective. It may not be the right application. Don't just print it for the sake of printing it, and so what you start to do is, what we do at CAM is you look at the end process, look at the cost structure of the part. How efficient is this going to be going through the machining operation? Because you can make the most beautiful printed part, but now when you go into machining, you just kill all the value add that you put into that part because of the cost to machine it is just too much. So we really take a total holistic view across the whole process to understand, how do we do this the best way in additive? How is that going to then transfer and be the best way in subtractive? And then beyond that, how are we going to inspect it? And so those three aspects are all part of the process to make sure that we're doing the most cost-effective, efficient way in each of those processes. And that's the part we make. It means a little bit extra lead time at the front end, because we have huge team meetings to make sure everybody's got their input in it. But at the end, you get a great process.
And can you tell us more about kind of the business idea behind CAM? I mean, Brad Keselowski is kind of known for NASCAR driver, but like how did this company kind of come about? Like, was it tied to the racing initially? Was it a separate idea, a separate company? Where did the whole concept come from?
Yeah, Brad too was kind of bitten by the 3D bug, when he was young and building cars, he started hanging out around his dad's shop and watching things get made. And somewhere along the line, he ran into an SLA part. And he was just blown away by what that piece could do, and again, like I said, with customers' knowledge base, his first impressions were way off, as far as what you could use those parts for, and, how they could function and what they could hold up to. But ever since then, he's just been really about like advancing technology, and not just being, not settling for what we can do today, but what can we do tomorrow? And, like I always say, when I'm doing the overview for CAM and telling people how it goes, what's exciting about having Brad as, the owner of the company is, no other company right now has a professional athlete as the owner, right? And what does that mean? Well, it brings a real tenacity that almost nobody else has. You think about people as a professional football player, or, a soccer player, or baseball, whatever, basketball. And NASCAR is not any different. It takes a certain personality to drive through to get to the level that Brad's at, right? I mean, it's just like, the cream separating at each level, right? And in order to escalate through all of that, it takes a personality, a drive, a constant learning. His whole mentality is what it's gotten in there. And he has transferred that to the business. So he's built the business in that way as well, right? So he really has some high visions for where CAM is going to go, and, really wants to be the leader in the industry and the largest service provider in the country. And, I mean, if he could get to NASCAR the way he's done it, I think he'll apply that same energy and that same drive to CAM. And I if anybody can do it, he can. So, yeah, it's exciting having him as an owner in the company.
And so kind of now you're onto your new venture, or I mean, kind of co-venture, I suppose,
Yeah.
at the same time, and in your fleeting spare time, as you mentioned. Do you want to talk a little bit? I mean, you got your machines kind of running in the background. Like what sorts of machines are you working on? Kind of what was some of the decision making, and like, hey, I'm going to go down FDM or SLA.
Yeah.
Like what's your kind of concept there, and what are you working on?
Yeah, my initial vision and what's driving this, first of all, is just get my hands dirty again, get back into it, understand how, fused filament has come along, and FDM, and just understand how the machines are and how they're built and where's the technology today. And then as I started playing around in that, I realized, this is so cool that for the prices you can pay for some of these machines, the additive world is pretty small. And so I started to kind of grapple around this idea of 3D printing for everyone. And it's not super novel. I'm not taking credit for being the first one to say that. I mean, there's a lot of people trying to do that. But I think today, where the technology is now, some of these printers that are back here, the Creality that's running right now, those are under $1,000 a piece. And, they do really, really good quality work. A lot of people have coined these as toys. And what I think I bring to that is, with all my industry knowledge and doing high end, high tolerance, critical work, I think the way my ability to analyze technology and equipment, I bring a different essence to this 3D printing desktop world, to be able to say, these aren't toys. They're capable of doing production. Don't get me wrong, they're not as locked in and as stable as an EOS machine or an SLM machine or a Fortis 400, right? A Stratasys machine. But if you give them the tender living care that they need, and if you're careful and you do your calibrations and you pay attention to what's going on, you can produce some of the same qualities depending on the materials, right? Like, you can't do all the materials that industrial machines can do, but you can do most of them. And with some of the upgrades that are now available, and some of the companies like Die Design and things like that, they're really, Slice Engineering and Die Design are really driving the engineering around 3D printing. And they're not the only ones, but just to name a few, that, you pay attention to those guys and some of the, advancements and upgrades they're making for these machines. It's almost there. I mean, you can almost do industrial quality with desktop printers, really, really well. And so that's kind of what I started doing. Was I thought, I'm going to bring my experience to this world and apply that. And that's what I've been doing. I launched my website, last week. And it really is just about educate, bring more people into 3D printing, and lower that cost so that everybody has access to it.
And the other thing too is because there's lower costs involved for some folks that are doing this, it makes it less risky, right? Like it's okay. It takes off that burden of failure, so to speak, right? If you fail a
Yep.
titanium build, you're going to waste $10,000 of material minimum, right?
Yep.
But with this, like a few $100 and people aren't even tens of bucks, and people aren't as worried, and so it gives.
Not at all, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you could see it right here behind me. I mean, the the Taz Pro that's sitting right here. It's got the same blue parts on it as the Creality machine is building. And the reason I do that is exactly what you just said is, why not have a backup, right? The Taz is already done. It built that build in 6 hours, whereas the Creality, it's a 15-hour build and it's still running. But, this way I have a backup. If parts aren't, if a support didn't build properly and you have some, bad layers or something, I have a way to have redundancy where I don't have to worry about it. And I don't have to wait till the end of a build and say, oh man, 3 of the parts aren't good and start all over. It's not a big deal to have another machine running. I mean, an $800 machine running 15 hours is no big deal. So why not? So I start, 2 builds when I run a job, and I build 6 to 9 parts for a job where I need 3. But why not? Because then that way the customer gets his parts within a day, like I aim to do. And it doesn't cost that much to build the extra parts, plus it gives you some more experience. I'm running 2 different machines. I learn what's going on with those, any kind of hiccups that it has. I learn from that. I document it. I can improve from there. So it gives you a lot of, runway to be able to do things. And yeah, that cost is what drives that. You're not worried about wasting a little bit of filament when it's, $30 to $50 a spool, and it's, you can run that for a month without having to worry about it. Yeah, it gives you a chance to iterate and change and do all kinds of things. Yeah.
And so what are some of the lessons that you've brought from your career working with metals and at Encodema, at CAM, that you can bring to this venture, like that someone who's just like maybe starting, like, hey, I want to get into printed parts for people. Like what's some piece of advice that you've learned along the way? I mean, you bring this like kind of level of sophistication where you've taken parts all the way to production that are on complex vehicles and high risk applications. But kind of what can you bring to some of these prototyping parts that you've built, and even production parts that you're starting to build with the plastic systems?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I bring is the confidence to be able to venture out of your standard technology and into additive manufacturing. Most people know who I am in the industry. So when I meet with somebody, they've heard of me, they know, so they have confidence right from the start. And that's what I bring, so when I start talking to somebody about, hey, I see you're making this like that, but, I think 3D printing can help you. And they say, oh, you think so? Really? I'm like, yeah. So we kind of walk through it, and by the end they go, yeah, let's do it. Let's do this in 3D printing. And so in the metal world, I think we've accomplished that. There's a lot more customers that we need to reach, but that's what I do in the metals world. And I thought, hey, let's do this in the plastics world too. I mean, plastics has been around much, much longer, and there's many, many more customers who understand how to use it. But I think on the higher critical level, and also the cost factors, right? Like the cost factors were so high, and just like automotive for metal, it's still a bit too expensive for the automotive world to get fully involved. Not to mention we're not doing their materials they need. But once we do the materials, we're still going to be at a cost factor that's too high for serial production. So driving the cost down is an important spot to be able to bring in that new customer base. And that's what I saw with the plastics is, what can I do there? Well, I can bring my confidence to apply applications and help drive down that price to be able to use the lower cost systems in a highly qualified, more accurate realm, to be able to use $1,000 printer instead of a $20,000 printer to print production viable parts. But it takes somebody like myself who understands like the criticality of the dimensions and the tolerances and the qualification and certification of the machines. And I think that's what I can bring to this to make happen.
And so you've touched on a few of these points along the way, but I guess looking ahead, kind of next few months, kind of remainder of the year, what keeps you going? What's exciting in the industry from your own personal work? Like what are you excited about? What are you looking forward to for the rest of the year?
I'm super excited about the AM Forward initiative. It's still kind of getting its feet under it, but it's the reason I point at that is the growth of the industry. I'm really excited about where being one of the original people in this industry and watching it grow over time. It's super exciting. It's kind of like watching your kid grow up, right? Like, and you see them go out and they went to college and they learned this stuff and now they're out doing it, and you just get so excited. And it's the same thing for additive manufacturing. I'm so excited to see some of the companies that are scaling now, and things like GE and what they're doing, and Airbus and Siemens, and the really big companies that are really pushing this. I mean, it's becoming a genuine worldwide activity to use additive manufacturing, and to have the president involved in AM Forward, and and to see the companies trying to collaborate and drive and build our supply chain. I'm just super excited to see that, we're going to start having, I mean, Kodama's original mission was to have 100 machines in the 60,000 square feet that they have. Well, they're not there because we all realize it costs way too much to scale like that, right? And Brad's got the same vision. He started, it's funny, they all kind of say 100 machines, right? And so Brad had the same thought. But what's exciting and what's driving me over the next couple of years and the future and the goals is, I think we're going to start seeing that. We're going to start seeing companies. I mean, Cam's at 20 machines right now. And, like Centavia's got a few more than that. But, you're starting to see companies that we used to say 20 machines was the magic number. Well, I think, 50 is on the horizon. And beyond that, it's going to be 75 and 100. We're all going to be like in that realm of being able to scale to that size. And that's what's super exciting, is to see this actually come into fruition, where serial production, the additive industry becoming a real industry. Just a little side point. It's frustrating when you get on like LinkedIn or Google or whatever, and when you're setting up a company, it says, what industry are you in? There's no additive industry, right? There's no additive manufacturing. So we're all picking things like supply chain or machinery, things like that, because, well, what else do we pick? So, I think as we become genuine and legitimate, right, to the world, I'm excited that I think that's going to change, right? That we're actually going to see additive manufacturing being part of that pull down list of that's my industry. And I think we're on the cusp of that actually becoming real. And that's what's exciting.
Absolutely. No, I think you're right on that. So Scott, I appreciate the time today. Looking forward to seeing you in person some of the upcoming shows, and I'm going to have to take you up on that tour offer one of these days.
Awesome. Yeah. Come by anytime.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.